Hello, everyone. Welcome to the March edition of the PhET Africa Share and Discuss webinar series. We're excited to have you join us again. We'll just allow for a few more seconds or minutes to allow everyone to join in and settle in. Then we will dive right into today's conversation. Okay, while at that, I will share my screen. Great. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the March edition of the Africa Share and Discuss webinar series. My name is Olusola Olateju. I'm the Africa STEM specialist at the PhET Interactive Simulation here at the University of Colorado Boulder. It's a pleasant afternoon here in Lagos. I'm connecting from Lagos, and we are happy that you're sharing your afternoon with us. Thank you for joining this edition. It's always great to have you back. Today, we're going to be having a very useful conversation that you can take directly to your classroom. It promises to be insightful, and we have a special guest who is going to, of course, address the conversation, and I'm going to introduce her in a bit. As it has become customary, we would also love to know where you're connecting and joining from. So we would like that you write in the chat your name and the country that you're joining from. If you're joining via Facebook, please feel free to write in the chat as well. Write your name and the country you're joining from, and also you can post your questions there. I'll address that in a bit as well. This session is recorded, as you know, and we make it available on Facebook. So people who are unable to join synchronously can also learn and join the conversation via YouTube, but also in our Facebook community. Like I mentioned, I'm going to introduce our speaker shortly, just a few more housekeeping rules, and we'll get right into today's conversation. For those joining us for the first time, this webinar is brought to you by the PhET Interactive Simulation in partnership with the MasterCard Foundation. We meet every month on the third Wednesday. And like I mentioned, the PhET Interactive Simulation project at the University of Colorado Boulder creates free interactive math and science simulation. The sims are based on extensive education research and engage students through an intuitive game-like environment where students learn through exploration and discovery. The project was founded in 2002 by the Nobel laureate Carl Wyman. The goal of the PhET Interactive Sim project is to improve the global teaching of math and science education. In line with our goal, the Share and Discuss webinar series is one where we bring in practitioners as well as researchers to discuss the effectiveness or learn from, of course, all of our experiences about the use of PhET sims in our various contexts and how we can take all of those experiences into our individual classroom. They share evidence-based strategy to support the effective use of PhET sims within the African context. Like I mentioned, the session is recorded and you can catch up on this episode or this session as well as every past session by going to our YouTube page. So if you have questions while this session is ongoing, please, you can use the question and answer feature here on Zoom. So we will not be taking questions while the speaker is presenting for the first 20 minutes. We would allow for questions shortly after that. So if you have questions, please use the question and answer feature here on Zoom, or if you're joining via Facebook, please feel free to write in the chat, and members of the team definitely will be connecting with you and passing it across to be attended to. Also, the conversation never ends here. The 1 hour comes by really fast, so the conversation will often extend into the community on Facebook. So if you're on Facebook, please, we encourage and advise that you join the community where you can connect with other educators, as well as, of course, many of our speakers to continue the conversation, ask questions, and get support as they become available. Without further ado, I'm going to have the honor to present our today's speaker, Dr. Kemi Olurinola, who is a researcher and lecturer at the Olabisi Onabanjo University, Agowe in Nigeria. She's a researcher and a consultant in the field of education technology with interest in the application of current science and technology to the field of education. She's a highly competent educator with experience working with children and schools in a variety of backgrounds. Her expertise is in digital pedagogy and education technology, and she's also a global education leader and teacher trainer. She brings in a wealth of experience from having used and conducted research on the use of PhET simulation, and she'll be sharing with us today. We're excited to have you join us. Welcome, Dr. Oluwakemi.
Good evening, everyone. Afternoon, evening, depending on where you're calling in from. Thank you, Mr. Shola, for the invite. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, great. Thank you. So please feel free to share your slides now, and we'll just hand the control over to you to get started.
Okay. All right. Just a minute. Doing that right away.
Thank you, Antoni from Zambia. Thank you, Willard Shinaka from South Africa. Thank you, Rihad from Tunisia. It's exciting to see you again. Thank you, Godfrey from Kenya. We have Kazungu from Kenya as well joining us. We have Tabot from Cameroon. We have Mary Ann, who is a former speaker, joining us from South Africa. We welcome you all again for joining us. Yes, please, once you can get started right away.
All right. Greetings once again. Like he has said, my name is Oluwakemi Olurinola. I'm an educational technologist, and I work with a university here in Nigeria. Specifically, I work with the Department of Science and Technology Education. And one of my major roles as an educational technologist in that department is to assist teachers in effectively integrating technology in the teaching and learning process. We're talking about using technology from a pedagogical point perspective, and not just the use of tech for tech's sake. So basically, that's what we do, and that's what I do at the university here. And one of the ways that we help our teachers ensure that they are using technology effectively is actually using technology integration frameworks to give guidance on the selection and use of technology. And there are quite a number of technological frameworks out there. We have TPAC, which is a technological pedagogical content knowledge. We have technology integration matrix, which is TEAM. We have the SAMR, which is substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. But one of interest to me this evening will be the triple E. And why is triple E a major choice for me? It's because the triple E frameworks attempts to define what it looks like to effectively integrate technology tools into a lesson while supporting the learning goals. So the focus for the triple E is on how technology assists teachers in engagements, assists teachers in measuring the engagement, or ensuring that students are effectively engaging with technology and with the learning goals. Because we have what we call flawed engagement. And so sometimes because the technology is there, the digital tool is there, the devices are there. And so we assume that because students are clicking away on the devices, they actually engage with the learning goal. And we found that not to be true. And so we are talking about using technology to ensure that students are engaging in the learning goals. You also have enhancement of the learning goals. So what that's the second E of the triple E framework. The use of the digital tool or whatever tool you're selecting to use in the classroom, is it actually enhancing the learning goal, or is it just a fun, nice looking tool? So we want to address that. We want to ensure that you're using technology not only to engage in the learning goal, but also to enhance the understanding of students' concept, or the concept by students, to enhance how students can have a higher level of understanding or engage at higher level of comprehension of the particular concept that is being taught. And of course, we're talking about also the extension of the learning goals. How do we translate this skills developed or this knowledge known into real life scenarios, into real world problems, and I know beyond the classroom setting, not just the comprehension of a concept, but how does it apply to our everyday life? How does it apply to real world setting? Are the skills or knowledge gotten from this activity or the use of this technology or this digital tool? Is it applicable to outside life? And why I believe this, I pick on this particular technology integration framework is because it actually helps us situate how we effectively use simulations in the classroom, especially in the teaching of science. And research has shown that interactive use of simulation, it's a popular tool for most science educators. And I would say yes, even from my personal experience, because I do a lot of teacher training. And as from my profile, I work in a department in the Faculty of Education, and we basically are preparing pre-service teachers, and then we also have in-service teachers we work with. And my role as an educational technologist is to kind of guide teachers, or in how to effectively use technology. And I have science teachers who are always at loss for how do we teach technology, how do we teach science rather, using tech, what kind of digital tools are out there to help us enhance our teaching of science concepts and improve students' learning in science concepts. And I would normally refer them to the PhET simulations. And so research confirming that, I'm also one of the people who actually confirms that. And we have not just seen, we have seen that these simulations also improve students' learning. For instance, I've had more than one of my postgraduate students use these simulations as a quasi-experimental thesis. And we've had students in control groups where they were taught this science concept without the use of simulations. And then we had experimental groups that were taught this science concept with the use of these simulations. And of course, we saw a significant learning increase, improvement in their learning outcomes, a significant increase in learning outcomes. The students who were taught using simulations as against students who were not using simulations during the teaching and the learning process. And so that's, of course, has made simulations one of the preferred ways to help students understand by experience. So the by experience is there deliberately because it is not just like, again, just watching or looking at a demonstration or listening to a theoretical exploration. Students are experiencing what different conditions would result into the decisions based on conditions. And this is happening in a way that just theoretically teaching these concepts would have been difficult to explain to the students. And we see that not only that, research also proves that experience of simulation increases their long-term retention and of course the memory of that material. And that is why it still comes out to ensuring that they're helping them to have an improved learning outcome, because once you can get that materials to the long-term memory at the point of recall, they can pull it out from there and actually apply the knowledge gained. And beyond just that, it's also an experience that engages students and in a way that requires independent use of critical thinking and scientific reasoning. And I want to highlight the word independent use because students become active participants in the learning process and therefore developing these skills. And these are also some of the evidence bases concerning why we choose to use a simulation in the classroom. So having understand this, we know that there are a variety of simulations out there. And but why would I always regularly recommend using PhET simulation as the one-stop bar? Let me give you a very short story. I remember in the year 2004, at that time, I'd completed my master's degree program, and I was not in the education field. I was in a total different field, but of course, it's one of the design specializations. And I remember sitting down one afternoon, and I put on, I was just before the TV. I don't know what I was, but I was in front of TV that afternoon, and I was watching the program. And it was an educational program. And they were teaching the concept of bonding, chemical bonding. And I was watching the animation of chemical bonding. And there I said to myself, that afternoon, I said, who are those who make learning this visual and easy to understand? If I had learned chemistry in this way back at my secondary school, I'm sure I would have done better. And it was at that point I decided I wanted to be part of this group of people. And that was when I began my journey, even in the field of education, not minding that I had to go back, even though I had a master's, to start with a postgraduate diploma in education, so that I could have a background in education and continue all the way to my PhD. And so for me, this is a life journey. This is something important, something that was a aha moment for me. And because this material was made visual, and I could grasp it better being a visual learner. And so for PhET simulation, visualization is one of the main things that one of the main reasons why I would readily recommend the adoption of this resource for teaching sciences in the classroom, because it makes science concepts, it's been designed to make science concepts that are abstract and difficult to visualize easy. And it allows students to see these concepts in action. Like I said, I sat down there and I saw how the ions were moving and combining with other ions and electrons, and all that had been said in class those years back when I was in secondary school in the science chemistry class began to make more sense to me. And so you see this concept in action, and not just seeing it in action. For me, it was a video I was watching, but this is a simulation that allows you to experiment with different scenarios, which makes it easier for students to understand and remember the material. Because till today, which is almost 20 years from 2007, no, sorry, am I correct? Yeah, we're almost 20 years from 2000. I still remember watching 2004 rather. I still remember watching that animation program. And so you can imagine if students do engage with learning their concepts in this manner. So that brings us to engagement, because the PhET simulations are designed to be engaging, and not just engaging, they are designed to be fun. And this helps students to be motivated and interested in science. We know right now we're in the first industrial revolution. We know that a lot of economies are being developed using science and technology, and there is much more drive to ensuring that we have more people in this field of STEM, even especially the female gender. And when you can teach science in a way that keeps students motivated and interested in science, then you are doing your nation and in a whole, not just your classroom or those students, a good service, because you are helping to ensure that there is enough manpower for the STEM fields. So this interactive nature of this simulation helps students also feel involved in the learning process. Accessibility. PhET simulations are freely available online. So wherever you are, whatever part of the country, whatever part of the world, you can access this. And this for me is also very key, because especially for people from our regional climes, some of us who actually teach in low resource schools, where you have limited access to finance. And so you have our traditional sciences, our labs empty if it's even available, and you don't have budget for buying materials or resources needed to teach the experimental part of sciences. This comes to fill that gap, and even for the internet-based, because you also have the offline, and so there's so many things you can do. Even with the first simulation, it has allowed for access to such an awesome package of resources. And of course, safety, we know why we use simulations. Some experiments that you could not imagine performing in the classroom because you did not consider it safe for the students. You have this same experiments being conducted now using the virtual laboratory options that you have from PhET simulations, and it's done in a safe and controlled environment. And of course, customization, which is also very key. Personally, I look for applications that are customizable. I don't believe that there's one size that fits all as an educational technology. So when I find an application that I can customize, or teachers can customize to fit the needs of the class or the needs of individual or students, that for me is a goal. And so with the PhET simulations, we see where the ability to adjust settings, to change variables, create different scenarios and explore different outcomes as it suits the needs of the class and as it suits maybe the need of a particular student. So this is my go-to. PhET simulations is my regular go-to when it comes to digital tools for teaching STEM courses, except what we seek, we can't find and then we look for any other source. But having known this, what's evidence-based, we've just looked at the previous slides and the affordabilities of the PhET simulation. Now we know that this resource is available to us and it's accessible to us. We can customize it. But what are the best ways? What do we consider when we want to effectively use this digital tool in our lessons? And so at this point in time, we will go into the core of today's discussion, which of course is best practices for using SIM-based lesson. So what are the things to consider when you're planning for effective SIM-based lesson? The first consideration I would say is starting with a clear objective. It's important that you have a clear learning objective even before you begin any form of engagement with your students in the classroom, any lesson. It's the starter points, and we, as educators, are aware of that already. So starting with clear objectives is essential when using simulation because it also helps you to focus the learning experience and guide students towards the intended outcome. So clear learning objectives communicate to students what they should expect to learn and what they should be able to do as a result of engaging with the simulation. What they expect to learn and what they should be able to do as a result of engaging with the simulation. And this will go to provide direction for the students, helping them stay on task. And so that's why we talked about engagement on the learning goals. So it helps them to stay on task and motivated throughout the learning experience. Clear learning objectives also provide instructors with a framework for designing and assessing simulation-based activities. Because if you have your clear learning objective, you're able to design appropriately and assess appropriately. And you're able to specify the intended outcomes, and then you ensure that the simulation is effective in promoting that intended learning outcome for the classroom. So it's important as a starting point to always set clear learning objectives. It's because at the end, you are able to evaluate the students' learning, assess the effectiveness of the simulation-based activity because you have been specific with your outcomes. And even in the designing of your activities for the class, the tasks, you ensure that it also aligns with the learning objective, and you're able to measure the extent at which the students have achieved them. So starting with the clear learning objective is very important. And like some example given, if you're teaching students about circuits, your learning objective might be to understand the relationship between voltage, current, and resistance. And so one simulation that you can use from resource is the Ohm's law PhET simulation, because this teaches the concepts very clearly and is able to communicate to the students what they're expected to learn at the end of the lesson. So it's very important when using simulation because to set clear learning objectives, because it helps to focus the learning, it helps to guide students towards intended learning outcomes. Yeah, it provides direction for the students, it guides the design and the assessment of the simulation-based activity. It helps students to understand the purpose and the relevance of the simulation. And of course, it helps you as an educator or an instructor to evaluate the students' learning and also assess the effectiveness of the simulation-based activity. So this is the first, your start-off point, your take-off point, when you want to effectively use a sim-based, let the learning objectives be clearly stated. Second, we look at choosing the right simulation. So having set a clear learning objective, it is important that we want to select a simulation that aligns with that learning objective. The right simulation can help because the right simulation can help students visualize and explore this concept in ways that may not be possible even through the traditional classroom activities. And that is why we are choosing the simulation in the first place. But as we choose the simulation, we want to ensure that it is aligned with the learning objective. For instance, if the goal is to teach students about planetary motion, like is stated in the example, then a simulation that accurately models the motions of the planet around the sun would be more appropriate. Why? Because such a simulation would allow students to manipulate different variables like the size, the mass of the planets, and see how it affects their orbits, providing a dynamic and interactive way to explore those concepts. On the other hand, A simulation that only shows a planet or planets moving in a circular orbit around the sun may not provide the level of detail necessary for students to fully grasp the underlying physics principles. And so that is why you have to ensure that the simulation that you're selecting aligns with your learning objective. And again, one thing you need to take into consideration is the grade level and prior knowledge of the students. So when you're selecting a simulation, you take into consideration the grade level and prior knowledge of the students, because a simulation that is too simplistic may not challenge the students or provide sufficient opportunities for exploration of the experiment, while a simulation that is too complex may overwhelm or frustrate the students. And the good thing about the PhET simulations is that you have them in grade levels, and so you know which may, and then that's where the customization comes in, because we know that even though you may be in South Africa, maybe in Holland, you may be in Nigeria, they may be in the same grade level, but they not have, their prior knowledge may not be the same. And so you could customize these things to ensure that it suits the age grade and level and the prior knowledge of the students, and not just use the simulation as it is, because if it's too complex, it may bring in learning barriers, which may lead due to frustration, or if it's too simple, then it may not be challenging enough for the students. So choosing the right simulation is also very key when planning for effective sim-based lessons. The third aspect here would be to provide context and background information. So now you have set your learning objective, you have chosen the right simulation for achieving that learning objective. Providing context and background information is important when using that chosen simulation, because it will help the students to understand the purpose and the relevance of the simulation and connect this simulation to the learning goal. So by providing context, as instructors or as educators, we can help students to see how the simulation is related to the broader concept that is being taught, and how it can be used to also address real-world problems or situations. When you provide background information, it helps students to understand not just the concept, but even the simulation. So you're providing background information about the concept and also about the simulation, so that the students can understand the relevance of that simulation for the practical learning. Because sometimes some of these simulations do include complex models and interfaces, and it can be overwhelming for students who are unfamiliar with the underlying concepts. So providing this background information can help students understand the purpose of the simulation, like I said, and the meaning behind the features and the controls. So we don't just, okay, this is the right simulation, and then as students, we just throw it at them and just go in there and do what you can. But we provide that background so they understand the concept, how the simulation is relevant to the concept, understand the different features and controls that the simulation has, so that they can be more fully engaged with the simulation and use it effectively to learn the targeted concept. So providing context is information. Providing context and background information is important because, like we have said, it helps students understand the purpose and relevance of the simulation, and they're able to engage more fully with the simulation itself. Having said that, then we need to guide the students through the simulation. You've given the background information about the concepts. You are giving the background information around the simulation, what the features are, what they do, and all that. Then you need to guide the students through the simulation. And why is it important? Is because it helps to ensure that the students are able to use the simulation effectively. The students are, because we want them to engage, we want them to be active participants, and so we want them to use the simulation effectively to achieve the intended learning outcomes. And if we have a complex simulation, sometimes these simulations do require some kind of skills, such as maybe manipulating variables, interpreting data, making predictions, and all that. So without guidance, the students may struggle to use these simulations effectively, and may lead to frustration and eventual reduction of learning outcomes. Because if you're having challenges not knowing where to click, what to move, how to manipulate the variables, then you will not be effectively using it, and it will not be enhancing learning outcomes. And because we want them engaged, but we also want them to enhance, we also want the simulation to enhance the learning outcome. So whatever will be there to learn, we need to be able to address that, and we can do that by guiding the students initially through the simulation, helping them understand how to use the simulation effectively, and how to navigate the simulation. And this guidance can also be provided through examples or scenarios, so that students can see how the simulations can be applied, how the simulations can be used, either through demonstrations or through direct instruction, or even through tutorials. The guidance can come in different forms. The main thing is that you are helping the students understand how to use, guide them through the use of this simulation. And not just before the use, even when they are engaging with the activities using the simulation, it helps the instructor to monitor the students' progress. And while you're monitoring, you can identify places where they have challenges. You can identify places where they are struggling, and give targeted support or immediate feedback to the students, even in the process. So the guidance isn't just it's a process. It isn't just demonstrating in first or giving direct instruction, but while the students are using the simulation, it's best to monitor their use and observe where one or two may be having challenges or struggling with a particular operation or manipulation, and you are there to give immediate support, give immediate feedback, address that challenge, so that they are not frustrated in the process. So guiding your students through the simulation provides an opportunity for you also to see if this is actually the simulation chosen, if they're struggling with it, or if it's something that they have actually been able to quickly adapt to its use, and if they actually applying achieving, I would say, the progress towards their learning, achieving the learning outcomes. So it's important that we provide guidance to our students. For instance, an example I put here, when using the balancing act simulation, you can provide a step-by-step guide on how to adjust the weights, how to adjust the levers to balance the different objects on the scales. We would not assume that our students are tech savvy, and so they can easily find their way through any simulation given to them. We need to provide that guidance. And also foster active participation. Using simulations for teaching helps students to, of course, engage, like we have already said, with the materials, and of course, develop a deeper understanding of the concept being taught. These simulations are interactive, and because they're interactive, they provide a hands-on way for students to explore concepts and ideas and gain practical experience in applying these theoretical concepts. So by fostering active participation as an instructor and as an educator, you can encourage students to take active role in the learning process, rather than what really plays out in our traditional classrooms, where students simply are passively receiving information. This involves asking students to manipulate variables, like we said, make predictions, interpret data, reflect on their own learning experiences. And active participation could also be by encouraging students to collaborate with their peers, either they're working in pairs or in small groups to discuss or solve problems related to the simulation. So as students, they are more likely to be interested and invested in the learning process when they are actively involved in it. So we know that for sure. And so when we allow them to be actively involved in participating in while using simulations, we are ensuring that they are investing in the learning process. And this investment in learning process helps our students to develop independent skills, develop skills such as critical thinking, develop skills such as problem solving and decision making, because when they work in pairs or in groups, or even predicting and deciding what next should I do to ensure that I achieve what. You are developing skills, they're helping them develop skills by allowing them to actively participate in the process. And so as they work their way through the simulation and apply their knowledge in practical ways, they're developing critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, and decision-making skills. These are skills that are transferable to other aspects of their lives. So it's important for us to foster active participation. Another way to ensure that we're effectively using sim-based lesson is also to ensure that our students are reflecting on the learning. Because like we said, the use of simulation is not just using tech for tech's sake. We're using it from a pedagogical perspective to achieve learning goals. And so we want to ensure that while they are actively participating, or after they have, within the period and after that period, they are reflecting on their learning. It includes using thinking critically and thoughtfully about their own experiences, identifying key takeaways, and considering how the new knowledge or skills can be applied in the future. So reflecting on learning after using simulations can help students to solidify their understanding of the concepts and ideas explored during the simulation. It also allows them to think more deeply about what they've learned and how it relates to their existing knowledge, or what questions or insights they've gained through the experience. So it's important that we do allow for reflective learning. Reflective learning also helps students to develop important metacognitive skills. They're thinking about their learning process, they're thinking about how they're learning, they're thinking about learning. And it helps create self-awareness, self-regulation. And by reflecting on their learning, students can identify their strengths and their weaknesses, understand how to learn best, and of course, also develop strategies that will improve their learning even in the future, and even their use of the simulation. And for instructors, we could also reflect on the learning process, reflect on the benefits of what just the simulation that we used. Did the learning take place as we had expected? Because this can allow us as educators to also identify what aspect of the simulation was best in achieving the learning objective, and what aspect may be improved upon or adjusted for future use. So it's also important, not just for the students to reflect on the learning, but also for the educator to reflect on the process that has just taken place, and if what worked best, what didn't work, what needs improvement, and what needs to be adjusted for future use. So overall, reflecting on learning is important when using simulation for teaching, because it allows students to solidify the understanding of the material. It develops metacognitive skills and also identifies areas of improvement. It also helps instructors to improve their teaching strategy. Using simulations, having reflected on the learning or the activity for the day, and better support their students' learning going forward. So the last but not the least, and not totally final on best practices, is integrating assessments. Because it's important that when using simulations for teaching, we also provide a way to measure students' learning and assess the effectiveness of the simulation as a teaching tool. I know we've done research-based, but this is something that also should be done regularly, even as educators, when we use a particular digital tool in class. And in this instance, we're talking about the simulation. Was it effective as a teaching tool, even for helping students acquire the knowledge or achieve the learning objective that has been set out? Did the students meet the learning objective? Are there areas where the students may have been struggling? And so we need to assessments to be able to assess that, evaluate or assess as it may be. And for the students, assessments can come in various forms. It could be quizzes, it could be exams, it could be an essay, it could be a presentation, it could be any other kind of assignments. But the core there is we want to know how effective the simulation has been to helping them achieve their learning goals. Having developed, and also one key thing is that the assessment should also align with the learning objectives of the simulation and should be designed in a way to measure the knowledge the skills or the attitude that the simulation was intended to develop, not something extraneous. What was the simulation? That's why we said from the very beginning, you are starting out with setting out clear learning objectives, and your assignment should be designed to specifically capture or measure that knowledge, skill, or attitude that was intended to the process, the learning process or the teaching process was intended to develop even in the students using that simulation. And also one of the things that assessment also helps us to do as educators is that we can identify areas where students may have been struggling. And of course, like I said previously, address that by either adjusting our teaching strategy or helping that student or looking for ways to better support students' learning. So integrating assessment into simulation is important when using them for teaching, because it provides a way to measure students' learning, identify areas for improvement, promote accountability and engagement. Yes. And by designing effective assessments, instructors can also evaluate the effectiveness of the simulation, because you need to also evaluate how effective the digital tool you're using in the classroom is as a teaching tool. And you'll be able to support students' learning in a more targeted and effective way. So having said all this, having gone through these 7 steps of technology things to consider when planning for effective sim, I will just quickly, as we run or look at a lesson design, so a lesson activity that I had created, that we see these steps, these considerations actually put in place as the lesson was being designed. So we have a lesson plan example, and the topic title for that class, it's a 40 minutes class, a one-time, a single class period of 40 minutes. And I'm introducing introduction to forces using the force and motion simulation. So like we said during the presentation, you start with a very clear objectives, and you can see my objectives. The objectives there already listed out. What students should be able to define forces, identify the effects of forces on objects and all that. And so the objective is stated there. Then having stated a clear objective, looking at what simulation will best suit this objective, what simulation best aligns with this objective. And from search, you find, okay, I can use the PhET simulation for forces and motion, basic, because I'm teaching grade level 6 to 8. So I'll be using the basic to conduct the virtual experiments and make predictions about the motion of objects. And so that is my choice of a simulation that aligns with my objective, and also aligns with the age grade, the appropriateness for it, the age grade, like I had earlier stated. And then the third one, which is the providing context and background information. So definitely you want to start your class with an introduction of the concepts. You want to know what the students know, what's their previous knowledge, what's their background knowledge, what's the entry knowledge, and then you explain the concepts, you discuss briefly, maybe 5-minute direct instruction about forces and what. Then you also, like I said, providing background information. You're also providing background information about the simulation, not just the concept, but also about the simulation that you are going to use, so that they'll understand the relevance of that simulation to the topic that you are teaching. And guide students through the simulation. So my first activity after the introduction, which is the 5 minutes, my students are supposed to go hands-on into the virtual experiment, but I need to instruct students on how to open simulation, the PhET simulation. I do not assume that everybody will be able to find their way through the path. So I do that, I demonstrate it, I guide students through a brief tutorial on how to use the simulation, what are the levers there, how do they manipulate the variable and all that, and then assign go in proper to the activity of the day, but I had already given guidance. And while this is happening, I'm also monitoring their progress. I'm also monitoring how they are using this simulation to achieve or to, the assignments that I've given them to do on their virtual experimenter worksheets. Are they able to develop these scenarios, their predictions, and what are they observing? And are they able to, do all that is required for them to attain to this learning activity. And the fifth, we said foster active participation. And so for this lesson, we're having group discussions. The classes come together for group discussion on their observations. Students are asked to share their predictions and their observations with class. And so, because of course, this is already something they know that we're doing at the end of the activity. So while they're engaging with the simulations, they're observing, they're taking notes, and at the end we come together to share, discuss the different types of what they've observed and how their predictions worked out and not. And finally, reflecting on the learning. So providing real world experiences about forces such as pushing a book across the table, riding a bicycle of the room, aligning. So for that, if we go back to the one of the very first slides when I talked about the triple E, we're talking about extension. So one of the things about that framework talks about extension, as extending learning beyond the classroom. And so when you begin to give real life scenarios, the students understand how this is applicable to their everyday life or the things they come in contact with in the real world. And so this reflective activity, which is more like a couple for the last 5 minutes of the class, talks about applying this learning, giving real world scenarios, and then assessments, asking students to identify the types of forces present in each of these scenarios. So for me, this assessment is not like quiz or an exam. We're discussing and tweaking, I'm asking questions, I'm asking students to identify forces to show their understanding, giving different scenarios to show their understanding of what they have learned having engaged with the concept and having used the simulation, and also discuss how the PhET simulation can help students better understand. So I want to get feedback from the students concerning their use of the PhET simulation. So this is just a 40-minute lesson activity designed, of course, using the best practice guideline I had just addressed. And I'm sure that if we look at our lessons, we already doing that in some way, but I believe that this just helps you to be much more deliberate when you are using simulations, even as part of your lessons. So I think about this point, I just want to say that in conclusion, using simulation in science teaching can be an effective way to actually engage our students and promote active learning. And of course, these are not all the best practice, but as a teacher, if you ensure that your simulations are used with an aligned with learning objectives, you provide relevant context, background information, guide students through the process, encourage active participation, and facilitate reflection and assessment, then you will help your students to develop a deeper understanding of complex and abstract concepts in science. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kemi, for this amazing presentation. Yeah, lots of reactions and feedback already. Thank you for improving my lesson plan. I'm glad that many of us find it useful and can take this directly to our classrooms tomorrow. We are very short on time because it was a step-by-step process. We wanted to allow the speaker to extend as in take the time to talk us through it. But we won't take too much time. We'll look at the questions quickly. But we're thankful again for the clear steps you share for us as educators to consider from identifying and defining the clear objectives that is essential for both educators as well as the students, to choosing the simulations, to providing background information and context, of course, guiding students through, even without telling them what to do, and then ensuring that they are active participants in the process. Then one that is also very important is the reflection that allows students retain long-term and also helps with metacognition and self-regulation skills, as well as integrating assessments into the process. Thank you for these steps. I hope the conversation will continue into the group, considering we have less than 10 minutes. I will look at the questions quickly now. And just again, if you have questions and you're unable to get to it, would encourage that you please take them to the group on Facebook. Search for PhET Educator Africa, and members of the team will be happy to continue to, of course, respond to your question or connect you to Dr. Oluwakemi. Contact, you can reach out on Oluwakemi on Twitter, I suppose. And I'll share contact also if anyone would like to get in touch with her. So Kazungu Katana is asking, looking forward to the discussion. Okay, thank you. I hope you found it useful. Rehad is asking, can we encourage students to discover by themselves without guiding them? But we just clearly clarify the final objective of the activity as a challenge for them. This is an amazing question. And would you like to speak to that as well? So this is speaking to your point around guiding students. So to what degree do we provide guidance where we do not impede exploration or discovery, but then do not stop short of ensuring that they do not find that as an obstacle to effectively navigating the scene?
Okay, so when I talked about guidance, I'm not really telling you to give them a word for word what to do exactly. I said provide guidance in, okay, this is the tool. If you want to change the, if you want to if you want to modify the variables, this is where you go to, this is how to move this from here to there. So they're not struggling to do that, because if they spend time struggling to do that, you have a 40 minutes or 45-minute class. And if the activity is 15 minutes and students have taken 5 minutes out of it or 10 minutes just trying to find themselves around the platform, then you are not helping anyway. But so that's what the guidance is. That's why we said ask them to make their predictions, look at the observations, what happened, what didn't happen. You're basically just facilitating and observing. And because of time, could I quickly take the second question that talks about accessibility by Tabot Fondia?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Yeah, so when we talk about accessibility, I understand where you're coming from. You're talking about large class size in Africa. And so let me just give you a case scenario of something I've done before. So I've downloaded these applications. And so when we talk about accessibility, it allows you for the offline version. So you can download some of the simulations. And when you download, we have a way of sharing. Zenda, WhatsApp, some of this even by Bluetooth and all that. And so your students, even though it's a large class, you can actually share this applications on their various devices or with somebody, because most of them do have access. They may not have personal access to devices, but some of them have access to devices by family members, and you have this contact. So as Africans, and that's why I said PhET simulation is one of my one-shot, because it allows for such applications where you could actually engage with them offline, have the simulation offline, have the worksheets even in paper, that you want them to, use as part of the lesson activity, and it actually does improve accessibility. So I think I would just leave that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Something to just quickly add, Zach, if you had anything to mention as well, I think that would be helpful. Is there's also some people we call open exploration, open play, where students are always inquisitive around what the controls are for academic and non-academic purpose. So allowing for a little exploration at the start before the activity can also help them satisfy that urge and curb the distraction and help them focus on the academic component focus on the objective for that particular class. And there are lots of feedback from the audience to be a very relevant presentation for a practicing teacher, connecting the classroom practice and how to make the simulation meaningful as a teacher. Thank you for the feedback. I'm sorry for joining late. Yeah, please, if you look at the chat, you'll find the link to the recording as well as previous sessions. We advise you to join, and also invite teachers who are either not aware to join future editions, or of course, catch up on this relevant conversation on YouTube so that they can watch. Feel free to share across widely as well. I think Riyadh is asking a similar question, which I think you've answered. Could the assessment be an activity that should be achieved on the simulation itself? So the question is around the last component, integrating assessments. How do you integrate assessments within the simulation itself?
So yeah, that's why I said you actually can, because some of those simulations actually come with lesson for teachers, especially if you're the teacher, you signed up as teachers, you also have some of those resources available to you. And then, like we said, it's also customizable, and you could customize the activity to integrate questions into assessments, because like I said, assessments take different formats. You just want to see how to test their knowledge. So you could vary a particular, particular data of a particular variable and see if they actually achieve what you want, the purpose for which you had that variance in those targets. So that it all depends on the creativity of the children. That's why you need to understand exactly what you want to achieve using that, what your learning objective, like I said, because that is when you can actually design assessments to align with that.
Okay, thank you so much. Because of our time, we will only be able to take one last question, which is from Willia Chinaka, and I think this is relevant as well. My question is based on simulations in South Africa. They are mainly used as demonstrations by the teacher. And I don't know if our speaker can speak to that, but I can tell you clearly this particular question is going to be addressed next week, where you're going to understand what strategies you can use if you're using it as a demonstration tool in context of scenarios where you have just a single device and all the students do not have access, or you're only working from a single device. Then yes, we encourage that you leverage a demonstration tool. But what are the steps to consider? How do you go about it? That's the conversation for next week. So it's going to be very practical and hands-on, similar to today's conversation. And I invite everyone to join in. So please invite your friends and teachers as well. Dr. Keb, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. We have 3 more minutes, and we want to respect everyone's time.
I think you've said it, and I would leave that hanging so that he comes back next week to get the answer.
Okay, great. Yes. Yeah, we've come to the end of this show's this edition of the webinar. Like I said, 1 hour looks long, but it's always short. We never have enough time to address a lot of these conversations. So please, we encourage you, if you're not part of the community, please, this is a good time to join and ask your questions. Members of the team, all the wider community are, of course, adept enough and understand the conversation enough to be able to contribute and then help you get across, irrespective of the level of competence around the pedagogical effective use of the SIMs, or even classroom experiences or strategies to consider, like we've looked at today. So we'd like to thank everyone for making our time to join today's edition. And like I mentioned, please, you do not want to miss next month's edition. It's going to be hands-on and practical, and we're going to be looking at some of the strategies to consider, from concept questions to what to consider if when you're using it as a demonstration tool, and a lot of the other things along those lines. And if you have particular questions around ideas of conversations we should have that you think you would find beneficial, please feel free to reach out to members of the team, and we'll be happy to find the right speaker to engage and address those conversations. Before we close, we'd like to thank our speaker, Dr. Oluwakemi, for making our time, and just allow her to say our parting words before we close the show.
Yeah, so thank you very much. And like I always tell teachers, I said technology actually isn't, technology is like a key in the hand of a driver. If you're a good driver and you have a good car, you'll get to your destination with ease and fast. But if you don't know how to drive, even if you have a very good car, you will not get to your destination. I think that's why it's important for us to use best practices and guide our lessons, when we integrate SIM.
Awesome. Thank you so much once again. Thanks everyone for joining. See you next month. Bye.